All right, what's up, guys? Today we're going to be checking out the Vatic Pro Saga 14 millimeters that just launched, and this video is going to be a little bit more casual than the types of reviews that we do on this channel. We're actually packing up to leave for the US Open in just a day or two, but I wanted to make sure I got this video out before we left. Anyways, sorry about that. And side note, if you guys haven't been to the US Open, I would highly recommend you try and go to that tournament. This is my third year going, and it is one of my favorite tournaments by far. I think in terms of amateur experience, they do an exceptionally good job. So yeah, check it out if you haven't been there. But anyways, that's why this video is going to be a little bit different. All right, first thing we have to talk about is the Saga line is actually cheaper now than when it originally launched. So they've dropped the price to $129.99 before code, and after discount code PB Studio, that'll drop it to $119.99. It was already in a really good price, if you ask me. I don't even really feel like they had to drop it, but bringing it down to 120 is a really good deal. In a day and age where paddles seem to get more and more expensive, and we're starting to creep up to that 300 line, maybe some even crossing that 300 line, it's refreshing to see some paddles go in the opposite direction and give people affordable options, which is kind of what Vatic has always been known for, and these are no exception. I think these are going to be very popular at the price that they're put at. And I definitely wouldn't let the price fool you. You know, a lot of times I think people see something cheaper and go, there's got to be a reason it's cheaper. I think with Vatic, a lot of times the build quality and how they play is better than some paddles that are even more expensive. So now with the price drop, this puts it in a price range that is around the Neonic Flare Prime X. It's close to the 11.624 Jelly Bean, even the Vatic Prism, or the Spartus Apollo. So it's in great company, and I think at this price, it's not a paddle that should be overlooked, especially if you're on a budget looking for a performant paddle. Now I want to talk about the shapes quick, and if you want to see all of the specs, I will have those on screen for you now. There's 5 paddles, so it's going to be a lot to look at, but I want to kind of simplify this for you guys. Since there are 5 shapes, I think it's really easy to get caught up in these really small nuances about how each might play, and I just feel like sometimes it gets overcomplicated. I feel like the vast majority of times when it comes to paddle shapes in a lineup, the paddles don't play that differently. Occasionally, there are paddles with different technologies, kind of like Gearbox or maybe even the carbon true foams, where I do think in a specific shape, the paddle plays better than another one. But in terms of these Sagas, all they did was change the core thickness down to 14 millimeters. I don't think you're going to find that across the different shapes that there's this massive variance. It's kind of all the standard stuff that you can expect, which I'll kind of break down for you now. So with the V7 shapes, you have the standard handle and the long handle, which all that means is one's a shorter handle, one's a longer handle. This is the elongated shape, and it's going to give you the most amount of leverage and power. So if you're looking for great overhead putaways or forehand drives, the V7 is probably going to be what you want. And then you have the Bloom all the way on the other end, which is their wide body with a longer handle. And this one is going to give you a much better sweet spot than the other versions in this lineup. It's going to be more stable, and it's also going to be the fastest in the hand at the net, which I think for a lot of people is going to be really appealing. And then right in the middle, you have the Flash standard handle and the Flash long handle. These are the hybrid versions, and if you're looking for something that doesn't quite give up the reach at the extreme ends of a wide body, but you also still want a little bit more stability than an elongated paddle, the Flash versions are great. And really, I think that's how you can boil these down. Those are the main differences about what you're going to pick. And if you're someone who's very dead set on the shape you use, for example, if you love elongated paddles, no matter what I say in this review about the sweet spot size of the Bloom and how it plays, you're probably just going to be better fitted with the V7. And vice versa. If you're used to a hybrid, you're probably just going to want to stick with that. Or if you love wide bodies, I'd probably just push you toward that. So I would not overcomplicate the shapes of paddles. Yes, there are going to be small differences, but the vast majority of the time, the differences are going to boil down to what I just mentioned a second ago. The main thing I do want to call out with all of these 14 millimeters, as you would expect, is that they're all lighter and the swing weights are also quite a bit lower. And I think this is a welcome upgrade because I think one of the biggest complaints that people had about the Saga 16 millimeter variants is that they all just felt a little heavier to some people. The static weights were a bit higher, and honestly, I didn't think the swing weights were that bad, but some people did have issues with that as well. Now the swing weights are all considerably dropped, and the static weights on all of my units were averaging about 7.7 to 7.8 ounces. So if that was a complaint of yours with the Saga 16 millimeters, these might be worth considering. So now really quick, I just want to talk about the weight setups that I tried on the Saga Bloom and the Flash SH, because I think these are paddles that benefit quite a bit from weight since they are 14 millimeter versions, and they're going to lack the stability that the 16 millimeters offer. So on the Bloom, what I ended up doing was putting about 3 to 4 inches of half-gram tungsten tape at all 4 corners. And the main reason was I wanted more stability and I also wanted more plow through. I just think at a swing weight of 105, that is pretty low. So bumping it up just a little bit gives me that little bit of extra plow through on drives or even blocks and resets. And then on the Flash SH, my main issue out of the box was the stability. I just found that when I was catching balls at the edge, it would just completely die, and it was starting to get really annoying. So I ended up doing about 7 to 8 inches of half-gram tungsten tape starting at the top of the neck, and then just running it as high as it would go. And I did find that that cleaned up the stability quite a bit. And I didn't really want the swing weight on this one to be any higher. I still had some room to work with, but I just didn't feel like it needed it. So that's why I didn't put any weight up in the head. But as far as how these paddles play, I think if you've played a 14 millimeter version of another 16 millimeter that you've liked in the past, there's not going to be a whole lot of surprises here. We're not talking about completely new technology in this paddle. We're talking about a minor improvement that for some people is going to make a really big difference. The biggest thing that I would say is that you lose some of the plushness that the 16 millimeter had and you trade it for a little bit of stiffness, which makes you feel a little bit more connected to the ball than you do on the 16 millimeter. With the 16 millimeter, I feel like it absorbed how the ball came off the paddle, and in a lot of ways that was really satisfying. If you don't like more of that muted feel, the 14 millimeters, you feel pretty connected when you hit the ball. I do still think it retains some of that cushion that the 16 millimeters had and is probably more cushioned than a lot of 14 millimeters out there that kind of have this really stiff board type feel to them. So I think in terms of 14 millimeters, they feel very good, but it's definitely not as cushioned as the 16 millimeter. The biggest upgrades to the 14 millimeter are the pop at the kitchen line. So if you're someone who excels in hands battles and you love pop, then I think the 14 millimeters are going to suit you a lot better than the 16 millimeters. You have more space to customize with weight, or if you don't even want to customize with weight, the paddles are all great low swing weights out of the box. And you get just a little bit more jump off the face. So if you're trying to get ahead in hands battles, I think it's a little bit easier with the 14 millimeters. Now the biggest drawback, like I've kind of already alluded to, is that the sweet spots are definitely smaller than the 16 millimeters. That's not really a surprise. Anytime you go to a 14 millimeter, the sweet spot is going to feel worse, but I definitely thought it was noticeable across all the variants in all the shapes. I think the Bloom had it the best, but that kind of makes sense, right? It's already a wide body. Its twist weight is naturally going to be a little bit higher. The paddle that I found it to be the most harsh on was the V7 long handle. Anytime I was playing with that, as soon as I missed the sweet spot, I knew immediately that I missed, and it was not a very pleasant time. With the Bloom, even in stock form, I felt like I could probably get away with playing it that way. While it wouldn't be my preferred way, it was definitely playable. The last thing I would say is, since this is a little bit more cushioned or springy feeling than probably most 14 millimeters out there, I found that to be really appealing when I was in the mid-court going for a reset. The way the ball came off was just really predictable, so I never really felt like I was guessing how hard do I need to swing here? How much do I have to give it? If I hit really close to the center, is the ball just going to fly? And same thing with drops. I just felt like I was able to do those two things specifically well when nailing the center. It wasn't a, oh man, I just have no idea how the ball is going to come off this paddle, because there are definitely some paddles where it's just a little bit harder to predict what the paddle wants to do. These, never really thought that was going to be a huge issue, but do just know that if you miss center, that ball's probably not traveling very far. All right, now I just want to make a quick comparison to the Neonic Flare Prime X, because I think these occupy a very similar space. They're both 14 millimeter paddles. In terms of price range, they're very close together. However, on the Vatic Pro Saga, it's supposed to have 10 millimeter cells, and on the Neonic Flare Prime X, it's supposed to be 6 millimeter cells. And the Neonic Flare Prime X is supposed to be a Gen 2, and the Vatic is a Gen 1.5. However, I will say that in the few play sessions that I've put on these, I was surprised how similar they felt. In fact, it wasn't until the second play session with both of them that I was actually able to articulate the differences a little bit better. I think really what it comes down to is that the Flare Prime X is stiffer and poppier, whereas on the Bloom 14mm, you're getting a little bit more cushion and dampened feeling, so you're not getting quite as much pop as the Flare Prime X. But honestly, overall, I would put these in very similar buckets. Like if you had to choose between these two paddles, I think it really comes down to, do you want more pop or do you want a slightly better feel? I think that's really what it comes down to. They're both great paddles in their own regards, and I was surprised that even with the build differences, how similar they played. On paper, I think I would have expected quite a bit more difference than what I actually ended up seeing. So if you already own a Neonic Flare Prime X, then I probably wouldn't go out and buy a Bloom 14mm unless you specifically really wanted a paddle that was similar, but with a little bit more cushion and wasn't quite as stiff. But otherwise, just stick with your Flare Prime X. So I feel like this review is very easy to summarize. While these paddles aren't gonna be mind-blowing differences that are gonna make people go nuts and feel like they have to buy it, I feel like it's a very welcome upgrade to a paddle line that was already very good, and the fact that they dropped the price makes it even more appealing than it already was. Sure, you could go spend $250+ on an Engage, a Paddle Tech, a Yola, or even a Carbon True Foam, but what you really have to ask yourself is, for what you're trying to get out of pickleball and the skill level that you are, would you be better suited with 2 of these Vatic Pro Sagas, or would you rather have 1 Yola? I think for a lot of people, they would be more than fine with having 2 Vatic Pro Sagas than they would 1 Yola Pro 4. That doesn't mean that these are necessarily better than a Pro 4, it just depends what you want out of it. If you're looking for the absolute top pop and power, then yeah, you have to go for a Pro 4. But do most people need that? No, I don't think they do. Not to mention, the Vatic Pro Sagas have had a very good track record in terms of durability. I actually don't know if I've heard of any of these core crushing. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened, just to be clear. But I feel like if it was happening, I probably would have heard a few reports. I think the only thing I have heard is that a few people have snapped the handles. But to be honest, there are a lot of paddles that still kind of deal with that issue depending on the player using it. So it's kind of hard to fault one paddle for it when a lot of them are still capable of having that happen. Vatic has always been a brand in pickleball that has delivered exceptionally good performance at a very affordable price, and I don't think these are any different. I think, in fact, this is probably one of Vatic's best lineups to date, and the fact that you have so many different shape options for the style of play, as well as different thickness options, and then if you wanted something more control-oriented, you could go to the Vatic Prism line. I don't know. I think it's going to be really hard to compete with this paddle in this price range, and I think Vatic did a really good job. Like I said, my personal favorites were the Bloom and the Flash standard handle, but I think all of them perform really well, and if you're already used to a shape that's more similar to one in their lineup, then that's probably what I would recommend you choose. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one.